Welcome back, everyone. This is the World Cup cake I made last week. I was such in a hurry to deliver to San Diego that I actually forgot to record parts of the cake and zoom on it horizontally. So here's a little montage so you see it. One of the first thing that my son saw next morning after I made the decorations was that I missed the Switzerland flag and I made it upside down. As always, this cake making process came with its challenges and laughter. Today we will focus on how to make the football, the scarves of Argentina and Portugal and their logos, a couple flags, and I will not go deep into every single flag because I have covered this into multiple shorts, to which I will give you the links in description. This is the cake, or at least that's the goal. And we will have a soccer ball that's going to be black and white. We will have two jerseys from the two teams that we want to represent here. One is Argentina, so it's going to be light blue and the white fondant. The other one is Portugal, and this is going to be in the green and the deep red. And I believe Argentina has some of the details that's in the yellow gold, so we'll just do a hint of yellow, but just very tiny bit. But basically this is going to be a white, black, red, green, and light blue cake. Most of you are new here, and this is not repeating myself when I show a recording of day 2 as I built the first level of the cake. But basically, it's the exact same process as the one I described in my second video, the part 2 of the graduation cake a few weeks ago. On day 1, I bake the cakes. I bake everything. I try to have the right measurements per level so I can then decorate the way I want with the right dimensions. Once all the parts of the cake, all the layers are baked, on day 2, I build the cake. I build level by level with whipped cream that I make myself with a half a gallon of whipping cream I buy usually at Costco. I will alternate chocolate cake, almond cake, chocolate cake, almond cake. So you have all the textures and all the flavors as you get a piece of the cake later during the party. And those 2 recipes that I've also shared in other videos are very simple recipes. You have to imagine that on day 1, when I bake the cakes, I make between 6 to 15 cakes in a row. It cannot be a complicated recipe. It has to be gluten-free in our case. And it's usually made with a mix of rice flour for the chocolate cake and almond flour for the Namandier, which is a vanilla cake that just marry really well with the chocolate one. But anyhow, we won't go back into how do I build the cake because you can refer to other videos that I can also add in the description. What really is different this time is how do I build the soccer ball, because this is a different shape. And the funny part is I had to finish it with my fingers. I do not have the right equipment to cover the round bowl cake with my flat spatula, so I had to finish the covering in the cream with my fingers. So here we are on day 2, super early in the morning, still in my pajamas, trying to figure out how to marry the sphere shape of the soccer ball. This was not supposed to be recorded or shared because I had sent it to the father of the 2 birthday boys so he would see how I had to finish the sphere cake. But I mean, this is a tutorial, this is real life, and you have to see that I had to use my fingers. Maybe you want to use gloves if this is for an order or someone else, but fingers work. At this point, the 2 levels are built and cooling in the fridge for a couple hours so I can make the fondant. And just like I said earlier, I'm not going to repeat how I make the fondant. You have a whole fondant tutorial in my part 2 of the graduation cake. I'm using the exact same ingredients. And once my white base is done, I'm going to cover each level of the cake with their dress before I even dye the fondant pieces in the colors desired for the cake. That's the most stressful part for me because every time I wonder if I will make it perfect, if it won't have any defects. That will be visible later on the cake once I decor. But really, any cracks, any pleats will be able to be hidden later in the process as you decor the cake. What you really want to do though is as soon as your fondant is freshly made and still easily workable, you want to cover each level of your cake, because it's going to be way easier than when it hardens over time. Using your roller, you will start by flattening your fondant in a 2 millimeter surface as wide as possible. That works for the size of the level of the cake you have to cover. You want to work it from top to bottom, trying to, again, avoid pleats, wrinkles, and cracks. As you go slow, you do not want to glue nothing on the bottom of your cake until the upper is actually covered properly. And you go down slowly, you remove the excess fondant on the bottom of your platter that you will be able to use later or actually dye in a few hours from now. I had to ask my son to record this portion of the video, and you can tell that as I am trying to flatten the fondant against the cake so it looks as neat as possible, I have a little foodie here that's taking some bites of the fondant as I do. When the fondant is fresh like this, it's actually when they think it's the most delicious. So here you are in the real life of the mommy kitchen. I'm trying to avoid sugars unless it's for very specific occasions. Well, when I make a cake, he's allowed a few bites of that. I've made sphere cakes for a long time because my son is now in 14U of water polo and started in 10U. And every year I'm making a water polo cake for the Geo party, which is actually the next video I'll be sharing. And I can still not tell you guys what's the best way to cover sphere cake in fondant. Some tutorials online are going to say it's one piece and you go down like I just showed you on the first level of the cake until you get to the base of your ball. And some will say you just go to the middle of the cake, you cut, and then you turn it around and you do the same for the other half of the sphere. I do not know what's best. When you do the whole ball, I have to tell you that it's almost impossible not to have absolutely no pleats under the ball, but it can be hidden later in the decorations. You have to, of course, cut the excess of fondant on the bottom that's obviously smaller than the center of the sphere. But when I try to do it halves, which is what I've seen the most online lately, I just can never have that seam in between the top and the bottom of the sphere perfect. So this time I've done it in half, and it didn't matter as much as when you do just one layer of fondant, because later in the process you'll see that I've been adding the black and white pieces on the soccer ball that typically are going to hide whatever base fondant you have already. Both levels of the cake are now covered in white fondant, so it's time to dye the portions of fondant left over and the colors we need for the design. So now we have a black and white cake for the soccer ball. We will have a part of the scarf for Portugal that will be in the red and the green. And for the side that's gonna be Argentine, we'll have light blue. And we don't want it turquoise, we want it light blue like the team. I hope this is gonna work. Just a hint of yellow for the pieces that will be painted then in gold. And as I said, of course, the black and the white. Behind the scenes, all my fondant portions are now dyed in the right color for the design. We won't go back into it since it's already presented in the part 3 video of the graduation cake. Let's make the soccer ball design together. I have pre-measured and cut by hand the pentagons and hexagons that we need to cover the soccer ball. The pentagons will be black, the hexagons will be white. Since I had to double check the name of those shapes, I will put there a reminder on top of the screen. But basically your pentagons have 5 sides, your hexagons have 6 sides, and sides all have to be the same size. If you use a cookie cutter, there's very little chance that it's going to match the size of your sphere. So I made them by hand. What you do is you measure the circumference of your sphere and assess approximately what size shapes you need to cover your whole sphere, trying to make sure at least all your black shapes are the exact same size, because this is what's going to be visible on the cake. Visually, the black is going to be more visible than the white. If your white parts are not all exactly same size, you're good. But again, just so your shapes work together, their sides need to be the same size. So if the sides of your pentagons are each 2 inches, the sides of your hexagon need to be 2 inch. So your hexagons will be typically bigger as a whole shape than your pentagons. Now that the sphere cake, which is also the second level of the cake, is decorated as a soccer ball, we can start the decorations of the first level of the cake, starting with the 2 jerseys of the birthday boys' favorite players. One is the Ronaldo Portugal number 7, and the other one is the Messi Argentina number 10, which was the perfect match for this event because one child is turning 10 and the other one's 7. So respectively, they could have their favorite players with their actual age number on the cake, which just matched perfectly. In order to make the jerseys as exact as possible, I used the cookie cutter I had for a onesie of a baby, which is probably for a baby shower, and I reduced it so it would look like a jersey. I also changed the neckline and some sides, and I had to, of course, use both colors of both teams every time. The front of the cake is set and determined by the 2 jerseys on level 1. So now it's time to put the soccer ball on top, centering it in the middle of the first level so it looks as neat as possible and as symmetrical as can be. And before adding any other fun decorations, I had to make sure that both names of the kids would fit on top of the jerseys. So this is what I did next. We've seen how to make the ball, the jerseys, and the writing on the cake. So now let's look at how I made the scarf of Argentina. I make it in ribbons, exactly like you see this technique. And same for the fringe that goes on the bottom that will basically fall on the platter of your cake. You want to cut it at the exact size of the width of your scarf before you start making the fringes with your knife, cutting just little mini ribbons into it. I showed it briefly on my short about Portugal, but basically here's the accelerated version of how you make it look like a fringe. You just do it with your knife back on your mat before we're applying it on the cake. For the Portugal scarf, I could not just make ribbons. I wanted it more to look like a damier. You know how the green and the red are going to be alternated top to bottom. And so I used the ruler because that was the wider I had, but I wanted the width of the Argentina and Portugal scarf to be approximately the same. Of course, this is left to your preference. I wanted the cake to really look symmetrical, and already it was opposite colors on each side, so I wanted the sizes to match. When you want to transition your ribbons of fondant to the cake from your mat, you want to be really careful because especially if it's the second day after your fondant was made, or if those bands are quite wide or long, your fondant may break in the transit. So you probably want to insert your knife under your fondant so you're making sure that they're not glued to your mat before transitioning them. Although I could transfer Argentina all at once for the Portugal scarf because the ribbons are so wide, I did transfer them the one after the other. I started with the green one because it was the closest to the name and I wanted to make sure that it would fit on the base of the cake. But basically, I didn't trust myself to transfer both red and green at the same time. Once both white ribbons were on the cake, it gave me an idea of where I wanted the damier to start, and that's why I've cut the ribbons once on the cake. The last fun part was making the logo of both teams. I did so with a knife and a few cutters I had available on hand. For the Argentina, mini droplets of, it looks like mini leaves. I used the letter I and I cut them in a little angle. I have shown this into a short, so I can give you the link in description. And then the absolute last part of the cake was making the flags of the 12 first teams of the World Cup. Besides, in one group, Portugal instead of Colombia, to match the birthday boy wish, of course, and the theme of the cake. And besides making the Switzerland flag the wrong way, inverting the colors. I had not understood then that a team that would rank second at this point in time could then beat a number 1 team and end up in quarterfinals like it happened for Norway. So for some of the flags, I made them after the cake was even delivered because see, when I'm making these flags right now, it's almost 2 a.m. and the cake needs to be delivered for the birthday party on the next day. And it's almost like a week later that Norway came back and had to be in quarterfinals with England. And so that Norway flag was made really late in time after the cake was even delivered. Overall, that cake was a lot of fun. I know nothing about soccer or football, depending on how you call it, but I've learned a lot. It was really fun to cover the games with the shorts that I have published on YouTube, TikTok, as well as Instagram. I don't really understand fully yet how I can cover events like this, but bear with me. I'm learning, and if you made it to this point of the video, is you really want to make a soccer cake, thank you for following along. I'm really apologizing for my strong French accent. I'm doing my best when I try to record. I'm still recording standing, and I hope I'll see you for the next video. Thank you.